Israel's military says it has carried out hundreds of strikes across Syria in the past 48 hours. It says it was targeting weapons stockpiles across the country. It also targeted the Latakia and al-Baida ports, as well as 3 airports. Israel is denying reports that its forces have advanced further into Syrian territory. Zein Basravi has more from the Lebanon-Syria border.
The largest air operation in the history of the Israeli Air Force. That is how Israel described attacks on at least 250 targets inside Syria in 48 hours, battering what it said were key military sites, including naval vessels and 3 major airports, amid a security vacuum after opposition forces ousted President Bashar al-Assad.
Later at night, while we were at home, we heard the sounds of the airstrikes. I called people at the port, and they informed us that the port was being targeted. This morning, we went down and saw that the Israeli army had struck the former regime's military boats.
The airstrikes followed the Israeli military seizing control of a demilitarized buffer zone in Syria, in violation of a decades-long UN-backed ceasefire agreement between the countries.
I hereby warn the rebel leaders in Syria, whoever follows Assad's path will end up like Assad. We will not allow an extremist Islamic terrorist entity to act against Israel across its borders and at the risk of its citizens. We will do whatever is necessary to remove that threat.
Israel is again claiming all its actions are in self-defense, to safeguard its border to prevent the old regime's arsenal from falling into anyone else's hands. But Israel's critics, including Arab leaders in the region, say it is using instability in Syria to make another land grab and bomb another neighbor.
Last night we lived in terror. People came out of their homes, wondering what had happened. We did not know what was going on.
Amid the chaos, rumors circulated that Israeli tanks were on the outskirts of Damascus, which Israel denied. In the past year, Israel has committed genocide in Palestine, carried out attacks on Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, Iraq, and now its largest ever aerial operation on Syria, a massive assault that is compounding the already challenging task ahead of bringing internal order to a new Syria. Zein Basravi, Al Jazeera, Masna, at the Lebanon-Syria border.
The United Nations has called on Israel to stop the bombardment. The spokesman for the UN Secretary General warns that attempts to seize Syrian land are illegal.
It is very clear that we stand against any violation of the territorial integrity of Syria. We are against these types of attacks. I think this is a turning point for Syria. It should not be used by its neighbors to encroach on the territory of Syria. It should be used by all those in the region and beyond to support the Syrian people so they can choose their own path, so they can work on a transition that is Syrian-led, that is Syrian-owned, that is inclusive, where all the minorities, the myriads of minorities that are in Syria feel safe and feel they are part of the Syrian nation.
I'm joined now live by Harlan Ullman, who is a military analyst and senior advisor at the Atlantic Council. And he joins me now live from Washington, D.C. So thank you for joining me on Al Jazeera. Are we witnessing perhaps a disguised land grab in the form of this aggression from Israel?
Absolutely not. I think on the one hand, Israel will argue that it wants to remove as many of Syria's military capabilities as it can. On the other hand, Israel does not have the capacity to grab a great deal of land in Syria. It's really overextended already. As you know, it controls the Golan on the Mediterranean that belongs to Syria. And it's been pretty exhausted in its war against Hamas and against Hezbollah. So my view is that from an Israeli perspective, it's going to take every opportunity to try to make sure that serious weapons do not fall into other hands. But you can argue that given the very fragile state of Syria, why Israel is doing all this now raises fundamental questions. So this is an issue, but I think that Israel's attacks will soon subside. However, they probably do not help the situation right now.
And Harlan, we heard earlier from the spokesperson for the UN Secretary General. I'll read part of what else he had to say, that for our part, the peacekeepers at the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force informed the Israeli counterparts that these actions do constitute a violation of the 1974 disengagement agreement. So certainly criticism coming from many sides here against Israel acting in a way that does go fundamentally against international norms.
Of course. But this is not the first time that Israel has acted in its own self-interest. And certainly from the perspective of Israel, which many people, including in the Arab world, will not agree, Israel sees a problem in that there are lots of weapons that belong to the Syrian government falling to hands that may be opposed to Israel. And so from their perspective, what they're doing can be rationalized. On the other hand, the effects of this bombing could be very, very destabilizing, especially if the new regime is trying to impose some degree of democracy and stability. But this is the problem that we face. One country's security is another country's absolute insecurity, and we're seeing that right here.
Well, Harlan, you mentioned perspectives from the Arab world. I'll just read some of those out for our audience. Egypt's foreign ministry has accused Israel of exploiting the situation. Meanwhile, Qatar's foreign ministry says that this is a dangerous development, a blatant attack on Syria's sovereignty. Saudi Arabia also criticizing Israel's determination to undermine opportunities for Syria to restore security and stability. So certainly a situation that has caused some inflammation and further tension in the region.
No doubt. But what have the United States and the Western allies responded so far? Probably so far they have not said very little.
What do you expect them to say, and any expectation of what the incoming U.S. administration might do in this situation?
No, I think that the incoming administration will say Israel has every right to do what it's doing because the possibility of Syrian weapons going into nefarious hands is quite serious. But I think Israel will probably hold back on its attacking after a day or so, and I think this matter will be put behind. There's also a very larger question here about the future of the Gilani government. People may not remember, but in 1959 Christmas time, when Fidel Castro overthrew the Batista government in Cuba, there was every expectation that Castro was going to bring democracy. He did not. I'm not suggesting that Abu Muhammad Gilani is a Castro, but what I'm saying is that the outcome that we'll see what's going to evolve in Damascus is very much in question. One hopes that it leads to a more democratic and more civilized rule. But at this stage, all that remains to be seen. And frankly, Israel's bombing, if it persists for an extended time, will not be helpful to that outcome.
And Harlan, in this moment, as you say, as the situation remains rather uncertain, how smooth can we expect that this process of political transition may be?
That's a great question. So far, and I say so far, it's gone very, very, very well. The prime minister has stayed in office. There's no evidence of looting or any kind of chaos as there was in Iraq after the invasion and when the insurgency broke out, or in Afghanistan after the Americans left very, very rapidly. But so far, so good. This is rather like somebody who jumped off the Empire State Building in New York City, passing through floor 75, saying so far, so good. Whether this will be a smooth landing or not, it's too early to predict in my judgment. But at least so far, the signs are not necessarily ominous.
Thank you, Harlan. That's Harlan Ullman, a military analyst and senior advisor at the Atlantic Council. I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.